This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. So if you're a beginner or an expert or anyone in between, you've found your new home. Welcome to Identity at the Center. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm good. Hey, I got an email from LinkedIn today that I get one every so often with companies that are hiring people in the IAM space. And there happened to be a particular airline hiring, and it happens to be the airline that we were talking about yesterday. And they're looking for like a senior IAM manager. And we won't say the name of the airline, but I mean, to find out that they're still using secret questions as a second factor of authentication, I don't know. I don't know if I'd want that job.
Yeah, not even. I think I don't know which one you're talking about, but I'm pretty sure. And if it's the one I'm thinking about, it's not even good secret questions. It's favorites. And oh my gosh, I don't know how many soapboxes I've stepped on and off of around. I hate favorites when it comes to any sort of validation. Favorites change, and they're very difficult for users to remember. Stop using favorites. Airline people, who I think you're referring to, Jim, whoever that new person is, please make it a mission, fix it, go passwordless, please do something better. I don't fly them anymore just because of my regional change, but I know what you're talking about. And yeah, that is one of my first world problem pet peeves that I have for authentication.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the reason I said that, I don't think it's the job that I would want. It's not that I don't think that would be, low-hanging fruit or shooting fish in a barrel or whatever you want to say to describe something that's very easy to do or very easy to identify. But if it's been this long and it still hasn't changed, there must be some inertia, like a marketing, like a CMO is like, no, our people don't want to have to use a second factor, or people like the secret questions.
Yeah, they like it because they don't have to do anything more secure. I don't know. I'm not going to say anything more about it because I'll get in trouble. Say something I shouldn't say, but I don't agree with that. I feel like this has been around for at least 7 or 8 years, if I recall when this went live, because I remember when it went live. I feel that's enough time to, figure out what your next step is from a stronger authentication. But I understand you got lots of users. You got to be very careful about change and, all that stuff. But man, I didn't agree with it 8 years ago. And I still don't agree with it now.
Yeah. Well, I know that, what really brought it to mind, though, about the airlines was I flew back last night, got home at 1 a.m., and I was very fortunate. The flight was comfortable and, it got in on time, but it's still a long day. You flew today. We're in the great cold north of the United States, and we're working with a client who is a regional bank. So much going on in the regional banking space these days. And I kind of think one of the biggest challenges for the regional banks is that, they're for the most part managed by the same, or they're required to become compliant with many of the same regulations as the big banks, but they don't have the size of the IAM organizations that the big banks have. And so it's got to be a big challenge.
I'm sure it is. I think you and I, kind of talked through that this week as we had conversations with that. But I think the good news is sometimes that can be a blessing because there's less bureaucracy to get through things and to actually get changes done. So I'm going to pretend to look at that as a positive glass half full scenario rather than the negative. Because Jim, I don't want you starting off with the negative. You were on a streak there for a few weeks. Let's not go there. It's Friday. I've been up since 2 a.m.
Jeff. It's not too late. It's not too late.
Yeah. I got to tell you. So I flew back we were in the Chicago area and Wisconsin and stuff like that. And I had to get up at 2 a.m. to drive back to O'Hare and to catch basically the earliest flight they have out of there. And I have found what I think is the best airline club location that I've seen yet in the United States. The Delta Club at Terminal 5 at O'Hare is fantastic. It's like new. It must be brand new, but it's big, it's spacious, plenty of options, plenty of variety of seating styles. I got to tell you, at 4:30 in the morning, it was a very welcome sight for me.
I think Delta's up their game across the board. Their CISO is named Deb Wheeler, and our guest today and I reported to her at the bank that we worked together at over a decade ago. So shout out to Deb. Your company's doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, just fix some of the Atlanta club, please. Those could use a couple updates. Well, before we get to our guests, let's go through what kind of announcements we got. I think we're coming up on Identiverse, coming up here in a month. It's May 30th. Yeah, at the Aria Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. We have a very special Identiverse discount code just for our listeners because we love you so much. And because Identiverse is so very cool, they hooked us up with this. This is like our first discount code for a conference. So get those little pens out. It's IDV as in Identiverse, ID as in dog, V as in Victor, ICEN like Identity Center 20. So IDV-ICEN 20. It's a little mouthful. I'll make sure it's in our show notes so people get it, but that gets you 20% off, which is very cool. So very nice of the Identiverse folks to kind of hook us up with that. And I know you spent a lot of time kind of working with them on that, so it paid off, I hope.
Yeah, it didn't pay off in terms of cash, but it paid off for our listeners who hopefully can save some cash.
Yeah, well, I think we talked about one of our previous, like, what do you do with that 20% savings? Do you throw it back into the pool, the corporate pool, or do you go to a little bit nicer dinner? Do you rent the Uber black car versus the Uber regular car? I mean, how you going to spend that 20%, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I like all those ideas. I think I would maybe go to a show or something.
It is Vegas.
That's
the way you do it. Let's see. Any other news and notes before we get into our main topic?
No, let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about banking in the IAM world. Maybe banking on IAM. I don't know. I haven't decided on a show name yet. Maybe that'll name itself. But we're going to invite onto the show first timer Srini Kasula. He's a senior IAM technology leader at Wells Fargo. Welcome to the show, Srini.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. It sounds like you and Jim have some history. So why don't we start there? I think, one thing we like to do with our first-time guests is to understand sort of their identity origin story and to find out, is IAM something that you chose or did it choose you?
We have an interesting background. And my journey started exactly back in 2000 when we were building an authentication internally. We've been actually said, hey, why not we look at the cards product? So we started on looking at cards product, and then I started my journey with SiteMinder, which is an integrity product, and then basically, implemented that for a banking client. I was working for a bank at the time as well, to be able to provide a single sign-on across multiple business lines. That's how I started my, security journey and IAM journey. And from then onwards, I've been pretty much, as the IAM is evolving, I was in the, authentication, directory, and then governance, and then privilege access. That's how I've been actually involved in the IAM. And, interestingly, Jim and I actually have worked at a, at a bank where they've been given under TARP a bank holding company status. So we had to spun up the IAM program, and we actually have to build everything related to IAM from the scratch at the time. So that's how, Jim has been my partner in crime for delivering that IAM program.
Jim seems to have a lot of partners in crime. So
they're all innocent until I meet them.
Yeah, definitely. That is for sure. So Srini, you're a senior IAM technology leader. What does that mean in the real world? What are you working on? Like, what does that entail?
Yeah, I've been working on quite a number of things. So basically, we we have, like not only just working for all the internal IAM, capabilities development that meets the control requirements, and also like we are getting onto a new digital transformation journey into the cloud. So we need to basically develop cloud specific controls and capabilities. That is something that it's new and exciting stuff. That's what actually I've been working on.
That's cool. So Srini, you and I worked together at the bank, and you left, I guess, after me at some point, and I think you got out of the banking world for a while or into consulting. You probably still had some banking clients, but probably some in other industries as well. What I wanted to ask you is, how is IAM in the banking world different than in other industries?
Yeah. So the banking industry is heavily regulated and it has a lot of compliance requirements. So one of the things that I notice is basically because of the regulation and compliance, most of the time there will be heavy focus and emphasis on how do I make sure that we just become compliant to the regulatory requirements. Whereas in other areas where you don't have this, at least based on my consulting experience, where there is not much regulation, they actually get an opportunity to be able to, try some new things like, AIML model based, like whether you are to look at the alert and threat response inside, IAM or, trying out some new optimization techniques, some of those areas, you can, quickly introduce. Whereas in the case of banking, you got to make sure that everything is actually run through the compliance and making sure that, does it actually, you know, introduce any risk to the controls, right? Those are some of the things that I see significant difference. And then another aspect that I also see is, for the most part, in the banking world, you try to make sure that you are in compliance to the controls. We don't like to actually have basically, at least, like in my experience, you don't actually try to think above and beyond just the controls, right? You like looking at the overall risk posture and what do I need to do above and beyond. So that's something that, we won't have a lot of time, I would say, in some cases. That is a bigger difference that I've seen between banking and non-banking.
Yeah, I can imagine, and some when I was in the banking space, and I've seen this, working with financial services clients, but not being in the space, it's kind of like not every client that I work with is in banking. But going back over a decade ago, there was a lot more suspicion and wariness of leveraging cloud-based services. Now there's some spaces of technology where you look and it's like it'd be hard to find a non-cloud-based service to fill your needs. You almost are forced down the road of using cloud-based services. And I always remember the hesitance being around putting, user customer data in the cloud. But I have to imagine a lot of those walls are breaking down now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jim. Back in the day, like, there was a lot of concerns. But if you look at today, most of the software is basically a software as service, right? You're already using a lot of these software as service. You already have your data in some of these cloud providers. So, there is a lot of shift in the approach, and there is also some confidence in the overall control structure in the cloud providers. So, banking world is also exploring and looking at opportunities to leverage the cloud providers, as an extension of existing data centers.
Yeah, so definitely, and with the amount that IT has changed and how the cloud has impacted things, I'm wondering what are some of the cool things that you're working on now in your role as a senior IAM technology leader?
Yeah, so there are a couple of challenges that comes with cloud, right? One of the things is basically the whole agility, right? With the, be able to quickly deliver the resources and able to quickly push the workloads, and everything is done through automation using like automation tools like Terraform or CloudFormation. We cannot apply the traditional, the old school IAM processes or controls. So one of the things that I'm actually looking at is how do we make sure that we support the agility, and then also to make sure that we also have enough controls in place so that we can actually support the business application to be able to be moved into the cloud. So that's one of the cool things. And also, other thing that I would also say, I mean, again, like there are various things that are going on, but another interesting thing is, we have been focusing too much on all the tools on the on-prem privilege access and all. What these cloud providers bring is like an interesting challenge of actually having their own privilege access tools. We need to figure out how do we bridge the gap, right? How do we, play along with their tool set? How do we make sure that we actually put the controls that we have on-prem onto these cloud providers as well? So those are some of the two things that I want to highlight as cool things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you get a lot of opportunity to um, figure out how to do things faster, more resilient,
Yep.
than maybe even like some of the cloud solutions that you're looking at, like, in terms of what service level agreements they can provide you. Can you actually beat those? Can you um, survive a disaster? I would imagine this is something that, you look at. It's like, can I survive a disaster, recover from a disaster quicker than I'm being offered in terms of an SLA? And then I've got to imagine also when you look at SLAs and just kind of historic data, usually like in terms of like uptime, um, you have to question like, okay, can you actually do that? Even though you
Yep.
might be putting it on as your guarantee, if they fail to meet the SLA, like what are you going to do? Not pay them for the service for a month? Um, you've got to look at it probably like, okay, well, if I can't get my authentication system back up and running, it could bring the bank to its knees.
Yep. Yeah, that's an interesting challenge too, right? Like although they have all these um, high availability BCPs, like you have various different data centers on, like between East Coast, West Coast, and global. But still, when it comes to authentication, you still need to make sure that, we actually have an ability to be able to quickly, fail over to the backup or fail over to a global region that is available to be able to still serve to our customers. So that's so far has been a pretty interesting challenge. And one of the cloud providers that we work with, they do actually have some of this, like able to kind of cache the credentials, like not the cache credential, caching the tokens, and to be able to still operate and provide. So they do actually have thought through this. They are providing that ability even in the case of a data center failover or a
Right.
region
So if we
failover.
think of your area of, it's kind of like focused on the workforce IAM. You get the big three areas: access management, identity governance, and privilege access management. Access management pretty much has to be available. That's like,
Correct.
that goes down for 5-10 minutes. people notice. IGA, you can usually last a little bit longer, right? If your provision gets slowed down. So it's not like, it's got to be 24/7 uptime. Obviously, you don't want it to go down, but you can deal with a little downtime. I think privileged access management is in a ballpark by itself because you have the authentication, but it's also like at that core systems level, like people, not only like would it be people be inconvenienced by not being able to authenticate, they might not be able to restore from a disaster if you have your privileged access management system down. And in my experience, that's a lot of the time where you face resistance or a harder time getting a PAM truly rolled out, is that folks who manage systems like servers say, okay, well, how am I going to survive if your privileged access management system goes down?
Yeah, that's very accurate description of what are the challenges with each area, right? So let's probably just touch on the privilege. I think it's a valid concern, right? You need to be able to give them access to be able to retrieve. So, we do actually have a couple of different strategies. One of the strategies to make sure that you always have a true break glass. That way that, they can actually get into it and able to quickly retrieve the access that they need so that they can support the business operations on needs, right? So to be able to get into the access and they're able to quickly restore. So that's an interesting area, as you rightly said. By being in the consulting, that is one of the concerns. Why in my consulting area, they in my consulting experience, they have not widely adopted the privileged access to all the platforms. There are a lot of concerns. So
yeah, I'm sure you guys do kind of the tabletop exercises and everything, but I know that back in the day, people would always say, "Oh yeah, you have a disaster recovery plan," but the question is, do you test it, or like how often do you test it? Because that's really the true grit of whether or not your plan's any good. Because you don't want to be there having to restore and your plan's not good. But I did want to shift the conversation. So you manage a team. I want to talk about like the pandemic and how we just came out of this long pandemic, but it it came on so quick. It hit a lot of organizations by surprise. They kind of shifted to a remote work posture and having to support remote workers at the scale that they've never had to in the past. I'm wondering, how did that affect you? And is it starting to ease up where, I would imagine, of course, it's easing up, but are people starting to go back into the office?
yeah, so pandemic actually taught all of us a lot of new things, right? One is how can we get the work done remotely, and also in interesting area for IAM especially, we need to actually be able to quickly scale up to able to support a lot of this workforce who can work remotely and securely, right? That's the second area. And as we are getting back, also see some of the positive stuff, right? A lot of people are actually somewhat, like a kind of bored being at home for so long. Once, the offices have opened up, they like that social interaction. They like to be able to get into a room and then whiteboard, especially on the area that I work in. We like to actually whiteboard a lot of stuff, like, how the integration works, how do we actually build these controls in place. So that's is a gradual transition that we are going through right now.
Yeah, did you guys ever get to a point where you could, virtually whiteboard? I mean, did you try to take that
Yes.
and come up with some kind of app that everybody could, I think Microsoft has it. I actually never got to that point where we actually whiteboarded virtually very often, except,
Yeah, but Jim,
trying to use like
Jim, you're a Luddite
Lucidchart.
though. When it comes
Yeah.
when it comes to technology.
I like
Yeah.
to use paper and pencil.
I'm excited for you to get your new laptop, by the way, Jim, because it has a pen. You're gonna love it. Sorry to
Yeah, I
interrupt,
mean,
but
yeah. So, I mean, we have not used a lot of that, but I think, as you know, with all the bandwidth, sometimes like you draw here, it doesn't show up on the screen for quite some time, like and then he's doing video calls. But what we have used is like Lucid Chart or Visios. You basically draw on the Visio, and then that way that you can share and basically, or you do the Visio up front and then about Visio on the call. So that's how I've seen, at least in my experience during that time.
Yeah. I think Lucid Chart, for me, it's like I can use Lucid Chart to draw up a diagram so much faster than with Visio. I think
Yep.
I don't like Visio. You remember those whiteboards that a lot of places have where you could draw on them
Scan.
and then you push a button and they were printed out?
Yeah, I've seen that, but I don't see that now. But I do remember a decade back, that was the trend, right? You write it on a whiteboard, you draw a picture, it will automatically scan and send it as a PDF to a computer that you can use, either print it or you share that. So I don't see that quite often nowadays.
it's like a nerdy corporate Polaroid.
Yeah.
It was really bad. Yeah. So what was the one that Arturo had, Jeff?
Yeah, they had Microsoft Surface Hubs, which are these, basically big screen TVs with touchscreen capability. You could draw on them. Very cool. Very expensive. I don't know if they ever actually took off and all but maybe the biggest enterprises or maybe the best Microsoft customers. But it's a very cool idea, right? You have like this basically 50-inch TV that you can write on, and it's connected to your team's room, and everyone can see it. It was neat when we were there, that's for sure.
Yeah. So Srini, a topic that we've been thinking a lot about lately is, training. Training of your team. What format do you think is the best investment? Is it sending people to classes? Is it sending people to conferences? Is it something else? Is it getting the Melinda membership, or just saying go hit YouTube and watch videos? And then, do you prefer vendor specific trainings and conferences, or something that's more, industry general?
I would say basically both, a combination, right? An industry general basically is something that I would say at least they need to have an exposure, because IAM has been changing, and evolving, in the last couple of years, right? I mean, it has been changing for the decade, but um, what I wanted to basically say is I want to be able to have my team to have exposure to where IAM is heading, and how the industry is changing and where they are heading towards, and also gives you a bigger picture of how IAM fits into the overall, cybersecurity ecosystem, right? That's where I see a lot of value for those industry conferences. But when it comes to basically an expertise into a specific capability, that's when I see a vendor specific, classes, right? You go there, is not only you learn about the product, it will also give you an opportunity to connect with other people, how they are implementing, what are the challenges that they are facing, how they overcome. So that is also, I feel like it is very equally important to make sure that, you become an expert in that area, right? That's how I see it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. So it's kind of like both vendor and industry general is important, for both fronts. I will say this about conferences. I love going to conferences and networking with people and hearing about how they're solving problems, and then even following up and extending that that meeting to, reconnect later. One question I had for you is, as somebody in the banking industry, when you're at conferences or wherever and you're meeting your peers from other banks, are they pretty much willing to share information? Are you willing to share information in terms of, here's what we're doing, here's the kind of threats that we're facing and how we're taking them on? Because I always felt like within an industry, information security is one area where you're not really competitors. You're not competing against it. You're competing against the adversary, right? Not against other banks.
Yeah, you are exactly right. Basically, we are not competing. We are not fighting with other competitor, right? So I mean, I have seen at least there are various different forums where they all come together and then talk about what they see, what are the best practices, and I also have noticed basically all these big vendors, right? They also have a vested interest to bring in all these folks together to say, okay, to improve their product, they want to actually have all these financial companies to provide their product feedback. And then they also wanted to hear from all these financial organizations, what are the features that you would like to see, which is common across all these companies, right? All these financial organizations. So I'm seeing more collaboration, more knowledge sharing now than before.
Great. I'm going to keep going, Jeff, if you don't mind, because I've got a few questions I want to ask Srini. And actually, what I want to do now is kind of do like a lightning round. So I'm going to throw some ideas out there, some things that I've been thinking about, and I'd like to get your perspective on them. So the first one is DevOps, doing the automated deployment, like infrastructure as code, deploying applications. DevOps, what are your thoughts there and how it relates to what you're working on?
DevOps is basically the way of the future, right? I mean, DevOps is the way to deploy the code. DevOps is the way of actually building the infrastructure. I think IAM actually also be part of that pipeline right now. If we don't actually be part of the pipeline, then we will become a blocker. So I think that there is a lot that IAM need to actually do to catch up with the DevOps pipeline and then be able to deliver all the required controls as part of the pipeline. I think there is a lot more work, at least from my point of view, in that area.
I think it's a big deal you have to think about like robots and their need to have identities, and how can you, as an IAM professional, make sure that that's being used and done according to policy and within control without slowing down the process, right? That's the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a challenge. Again, so what we need to make sure though is we should support the agility, but at the same time, we also need to make sure that we have enough controls in place so that we are managing the risk.
Yeah, and maybe I ask these out of order because I think this is the easier one, or the thing that people point to, that it's like, oh, this is how you're going to secure cloud. So this new space called CIEM, or CIEM, stands for Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. What are your thoughts there?
So that's an interesting area. So that is basically is going to be key if you wanted to have a visibility into the cloud. So a lot of these cloud providers basically give you some visibility, but not the extent that you want to know about it, right? So these, like a CIEM vendors who has become like a cloud agnostic, and they are able to provide a visibility across multi-cloud, which is actually going to be very key because you want to know what are the the entitlements, what are the accounts, and who has access to what, and then what type of access they provide. The CIM actually, is solving that problem right now. So that is actually going to be a key if you are into the cloud. So that is evolving, right? That's evolving. So if you look at the trend, right now there are some point solutions that are actually coming out, but I do see in the future that should become part of the IGA solution, because how IGA actually has a visibility into the on-prem systems, like a CIM is providing the similar visibility, but we need to, I hope I would see in the near future is having these IGA products, bringing that CIM capability into the IGA, and not only just bringing the visibility. We probably need to look at in the future, how do we actually also leverage that data to even, think about how do we provision, or how do we remediate the over provisioned access. That's how I see in the future the industry is going to head towards. I hope.
I think that's really insightful that you could see it moving toward IGA, because they're both kind of a detective control. Who has access to what? There's periodic reviews of that. But I think, at least operationally speaking, the idea with Keem is that you're looking at it on a more frequent basis, or maybe that's not true, but that you're looking at the, over provisioning is, I think the word that comes to mind for me is, hey, this role is given to too many people. These people have too many roles, et cetera. They don't use these roles. And then you can go and right size access, but it's after the fact. They've been sitting with that role for so long, they haven't used it in 90 days. Well, you should take it away from that person, but the reality is they never needed it in the first place.
Correct. Yeah, that's CIM is giving another perspective which we never had with all these IGA products. Is it also looks at the usage. IGAs never actually have visibility into the target system whether this entitlement has been used or not. CIM actually looks at not only the audit data about, okay, when was this last time this role has been used, who has used it, and it also looks at the analysis of the role and the corresponding permissions, who has access to it, and then when was is this a over provisioned access for what they are trying to do. So it is bringing a different dimension which we never had even on-prem.
Yeah, you're right. And, Jeff and I have had this discussion. I don't want to call it a debate, but it's more like IAM. We talk about IAM. It's who has access to what. And then there was the UBA or UEBA, user behavior analytics, which was, and what are they doing with that access? Is the access being used appropriately? And I think there's an element of that to Keem where, it's just to your point, like, okay, we're seeing things we're not able to see with IGA. Are they actually using the access? So the last one in the lightning round was, passwordless, and a lot of passwordless solutions have identity proofing in terms of part of your onboarding process into the organization using a government issued ID, and maybe doing like a video selfie to make sure that you actually match up, moving that into maybe that pre-populates some of your tax forms, but it certainly gives you a higher proof that the person is who they say they are. Maybe later on you can use that data for passwordless, so you can do passwordless with a biometric, things like that. So I wanted to get your idea of like, how important to you is that, or does that just seem like science fiction?
So you touched on two different topics. One is the identity proofing. So at least in the enterprise world, basically the proofing actually happens before an enterprise user comes into the corporate, right? You need to basically go through all the background check, all of that, and then we use a HR system, and then typically we trust once you are in the HR system. When it comes to the passwordless, you're talking about, that's a different way how I see it. The passwordless, basically, again, we all need to move towards passwordless because we all know that passwords are not a secured way of authenticating. For the passwordless, believe it or not, like it is not only just for the human users, right? As you see, a lot of these, like vendors, like providers like a Google or Microsoft, they are moving towards a concept called managed identity or managed account. So they want to be able to basically have these, identities become passwordless because they don't want to be in a business of, maintaining the credential and then, putting a burden on the app teams to actually rotating the credentials. They want to actually provide required resource access, at the same time also bind it to a resource so that you are focusing on just getting the access you need and getting the access that you need to the right resource at the right time, and moving the burden of taking out the burden of rotating credentials. If you look at traditionally, like most of the on-prem, you have a service account, you need to vault it, you need to make sure that you are rotating it, and all of that is a lot of overhead. And for the human users, passwordless definitely is the way to go. I would see that as more and more applications and more systems support it, I think the passwordless is the goal. It's the most secure way of authenticating. That's how I see it.
So I'm going to ask you to put on your prediction hat here. I'm not going to hold you to it, but when do you think, at least for your organization, when do you think you'll be ready to introduce passwordless for your customers or for your internal workforce? Like, what does your timing feel like right now?
We already use passwordless for internal enterprise users. So we are trying to expand that scope, right? Because if you look at it, passwordless, it is something that apps also should be in a position to accept that, right? Not all the applications are ready to accept the passwordless. We already have certain applications passwordless. We already have rolled this out to several users internally. And, I would see in the next couple of years, it's going to be widely adopted for various different applications. I think this is more on the vendors to become a passwordless compliant.
Well, we all know that a lot of banks love their mainframes, so I'm sure IBM and RackF and Top Secret and all those other ones are hot on the trail of getting passwordless enabled as part of their authentication stack. I won't put you on the fire, to answer that, but that's just my own 2 cents. What are some tips that people can take away if I'm in financial services and I'm listening to this? And maybe they thought about it, maybe they haven't, but from your perspective, what are some tips when it comes to identity and access management that you think people in your industry should be thinking about?
Yeah. My tip is going to be, think beyond the compliance requirements, right? We need to be more cognizant of the threat landscape and make sure that, we are aware of the risks out there. Think above and beyond the bare minimum audit or compliance requirements. That's, I would say, is going to be the number one tip that I can recommend. And it's not only for myself, for other folks as well.
Better security helps everybody, I would imagine, in the business. So, the rising tide lifts all boats. Let's go ahead and start to wrap up the conversation there because you've been super generous with your time. It is a Friday after, actually almost evening. It's 5:00 on a Friday. So I want you to get on with your weekend. But before we go, let's end on a lighter note. And here's what I got for us this week. Would you rather go into the past and meet your ancestors, or go into the future and meet your great-great-grandchildren? Srini, you're the guest of honor. We'll start with you first.
I would like to keep the past in the past. I don't want to look back. I would want to rather actually look into the future, and I want to meet my grandkids.
Jim, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, you know me, like the first thing that came to mind was like the past, because it's just like I'm into history. I'd like to see how people lived, but man, just thinking about like the future and seeing what the world was like in the future and seeing, how you, well, first off, I guess if you have grandkids or great grandkids, then, hey, you did all right. You got, the world didn't implode. And I mean, unless you go into the future and it's like some kind of like Terminator scenario where it's like,
Jim, we're trying to stay positive, man. Come on, you're killing me here.
Hey, the episode almost ended and it was all positive, so I had to bring it back down to reality.
Mhm.
If there was an apocalypse scenario, I really wouldn't want to be there for that.
Yeah, I think we have
I'd
that's our next podcast is Apocalypse Talk with Jim McDonald. The end with Jim McDonald.
Yeah. So I better get out there and live while the world's still going. So I'm going to just say future and move on.
Okay. So I wonder if this is, if when you answer this question, if it relates if you have children or not. I don't have children, but I still would go into the future. Not because I want to meet my great-grandchildren, but because like you, Jim, and I think maybe Srini is like, I want to see what the world is like, right? Do we get to the Star Trek, phase yet? And, in the next, let's say 100 years, 200 years, whatever that looks like. With life expectancies going longer, maybe, that extends what a great-great-grandchild, might look like from an age or distance perspective from where we're at right now. I don't know. I'm a future. I'm with you, Srini. I'm not going to the past. Past is past. Jim, I am a little surprised. I thought for sure you would want you would go between the two, but you would end up on the past because of your love for documentaries.
So so I surprised you.
You did.
But here's the thing about the past that I always think about is that probably I'd be dead in the past because I'm almost 50. And like people didn't, the further back in the past, there are a lot fewer 50-year-olds. People who are 60 were considered very wise because like they basically lived well beyond their life expectancy. So I'd be like the really old dude in the past.
Jim, you did it again. You took it to the morbid tip. Thanks for that. We're gonna go ahead.
Welcome, everyone.
We're gonna go ahead and leave it there for this week. Srini, thank you so much for being part of this. We like to put our guest LinkedIn into our show notes, so hopefully that's okay. If people have questions, maybe, or things that they want to reach out to you, hopefully you're open to that. Is that all right?
Yep.
Of course, I ask in front of thousands of people who are listening. So you say no, you're a jerk. Let's see. As far as we go, you can visit us on the web. We're at idacpodcast.com. We're on Twitter at idacpodcast. We're also on Mastodon at idacpodcast at infosec.exchange. Jim and I always love to engage with listeners. Got a lot of actually great messages this week, including a book that one of our listeners wrote. So I have just started it. I got through the first chapter on my flight today. So I'm intrigued, and I will maybe be giving a book review here in a couple episodes. So that was kind of cool. But Jim and I always like to connect on LinkedIn with folks. So feel free and show ideas, whatever you've got for us. We're happy to bring it to the show. And don't forget about our Identiverse discount code. It's IDVICEN20. I'll have it in our show notes as well. Get you 20% off your registration. And you can use that to do an Uber Black or however you think you can, finagle that 20% back into your own pocket. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying, there's an option there. And then don't forget to subscribe and, rate the show. That always helps us. That's the number one way you can help us, grow and continue to share with other folks. So with that, we will go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks, Srini. Thanks, Jim. Let's start the weekend, and we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.